the other beauty about impact investing is if you help that company get on its feet and grow and eventually not need money anymore, you have created sustainable impact that no longer needs donor dollars.
Right.
Those donor dollars can now go to something else that needs church planting or whatever. And so you've now helped tear off a corner of the darkness in the world, created some light in the world, and it now can fund itself because it's a profitable business.
Hi, friends. Today is the beginning of a 4-part series on impact investing. And whether you know a little bit about it or whether you know a lot about it, I know you're going to enjoy these 4 incredible women who each represent a different perspective. We're starting out with Dana Wichterman today, an author and investor in her own right, and someone who works at Impact Foundation. You're going to hear the basics and terms defined, and then some real life stories of some people who have just received so much joy with doing impact investing. And I'm glad you're here because I feel like this is such an exciting time in history, and God is entrusting a lot of wealth to women. So we're here to help educate, empower you, equip you so you can be the best steward of what He has given you. So thanks for being here. Today, I have a really fun guest in the studio with me named Dana Wichterman. And she recently just won the award for the Faith-Driven Investor of the Year. And she and her husband, Bill, recently co-authored the book called Stewards, Not Owners: The Joy of Aligning Your Money with Your Faith. And you can find the book. It's a blue cover on Amazon, but they really challenge the mindset of ownership and then encouraging all of us as believers to view our money and resources as gifts from God to be managed wisely for His purposes. And she is just a wonderful gift. She works currently at the Impact Foundation, and she'll tell you more about that. And she also had a season where she worked in the government, helping the poor globally, holds an MA in international relations from Columbia, lives outside of DC, and they have 3 grown children. So welcome, Dana, to the podcast.
Thank you, Kim. I'm so glad to be here.
Yes, it's such a treat. I remember meeting you about 3 years ago through a mutual friend, Nick Bonner. Shout out to Nick here in San Diego. And I know you're clear across the country, but that's why we love tech, that it feels like we're in the same room. But he said, you have got to meet my friend Dana. And then even in the past 3 years to watch just how you've grown and what you've done as an author and writing this book and your speaking opportunities, it's just been really fun to follow your journey. And really the purpose of today and having you on the show is this is the beginning of a 4-part series on impact investing. And so you're kicking off the series, but I think you're a perfect guest to kick it off because really the concept that's in your book about all of us being stewards, not owners, we feel like sometimes, oh, we work so hard, this is my money, I need to protect it, or it's my money, I want to be generous with it. But no, that's all false. Like none of it is ours. And we're only just stewards in a great way because the King of Kings has asked us to steward His resources. And it's really a journey to figure out what does He want us to do with his resources. And sometimes we do a great job and other times we fall on our faces and we get up and we keep going forward. But I think the mindset shifts everything when we realize, it's kind of like you take your car to the mechanic and you get this huge bill and you think, wow, I wasn't planning on that this month, but I guess God wants His resources going to that mechanic and his family, and they're not mine, as it is. But let's go ahead and talk from the beginning of this show. Let's use your book as the beginning of this conversation of why did you write the book and what were you hoping would come as a result of authoring this book?
Yeah, so my husband and I have taught a lot of adult Sunday school classes on finances. And from the very beginning of our marriage, 37 years ago, we had gone through the Crown Financial Program, the Larry Burkett program, and had felt so much of our marriage on the idea that we are stewards, not owners. And, you can assent to something mentally, but to work it out into your heart and your actual emotional responses it's still a work. I'm still a work in progress.
Absolutely. For all of us.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, during the pandemic, we thought this would be a good time to maybe start writing some of this down. And then in the last 3 to 4 years, as you say, I have been involved with the faith-driven investor and faith-driven entrepreneur community and have seen so many creative people, like just kingdom-minded people that are sold out to not jump onto their agenda for God, but to jump on God's agenda and say, Lord, you've broken my heart over this problem in the world, and you've given me creative ideas on how to address it, to tackle it, maybe to solve it, and to do it with a for-profit mentality. Now, again, they also, if you have a nonprofit approaching it, that's awesome too. But I think we know that there's not enough nonprofit dollars in the world to address all the needs. Right. And in fact, we're never going to address all the needs until Christ comes again. But we are here as agents of his. We're really redemptive ambassadors for the King. And so if we can literally do the gospel in word and deed and through business and have business for good that contributes to the flourishing of the world, that is part of our kingdom responsibility. And so when Bill and I were thinking, we've really learned throughout our own life from so many other people in the generosity space and the investing space that all of our resources belong to God. So our giving, our savings, our investment, we're supposed to try to get out of debt so that we are freer to respond to God's call when he calls on us for his resources. And then the area that I think people don't understand as much is how their investment dollars, which all of us, if we have a 401k or some money in the bank, IRA, those dollars are doing something in the world. They're investing in some company that's having an impact. And wouldn't it be better to know that those companies are doing no harm and possibly doing good in the world, contributing goods and services within the world that we would support, and that if the Lord would say, great, that's where I want meaning the Lord's investment dollars to go. And then those profits come back, and I want you to manage those as a steward. So we decided to write the book together, and we decided to concentrate on 24 stories of people, modern day saints that are doing this. And some of them, their stories are out in the ecosystem, but a lot of them, their stories were not out. And we thought we just need to show people that people literally do live like this today, that they are surrendered, and that not only do they find satisfaction, but the deeper they get in, the more joy they have, the more sense of meaning, the more sense of partnering and co-laboring with the Lord. And we just wanted people to see that, because for us, generosity has been I'd say the main way the Lord has taught me who he is and helped me become more like him. So taking on the family likeness. And it wasn't an easy, giving and generosity are not my spiritual gift. So I had to learn over time with him patiently teaching me, starting with guilt, moving towards obedience and duty, which I think duty is a fine way to start something, and then moving into the joy and the release and surrender, where it really is just the state of having stewardship in my heart and wanting to please the Lord with my management of the resources he's giving me. It's just, there's a freedom that I had never anticipated.
Because then you're just a conduit. You're not blocking anything. You're just the pipe that God's moving his money through you to whatever he wants to do. But when we, because of all those things you mentioned, whether it's the guilt, the shame, the fear, scarcity mindset, when we block that pipe, then that money can't flow. And then God, it's not like he doesn't get the money to that area or group he wanted to. He's just going to do it through someone else or some other means. And we miss the blessing of being a part of it.
Exactly.
And that's why he gives us all these years on this earth to keep learning so we can do redos and try it again. And okay, let's try, another shot at this kind of thing, because he's so gracious. And I love it, Dana, because I feel like, and we were talking about a little bit this before the show, but, you think of Randy Alcorn in his books on heaven that have been just so influential for people. And and he's really unpacked scripture to explain what scripture says about what heaven will be like. And we all know how many verses are in the Bible about money. And yet I don't know of another book like yours that works with two things. One is our mindset of the stewardship component, but then I love how you did tell the message through the various individuals' lives, and we'll highlight a few of those in this conversation. But I think that's very powerful because story, sticks with us once we read the book. And we're supposed to be iron sharpening iron for each other. We're supposed to be around one another and hear how she did this, and then we go, wow, I didn't even know that was possible. But then that gives me an idea of, well, I could take the next step and do this here in my own life. So, okay, let's define a few terms here before we go further. And I'm going to define two things. First of all, I mentioned Impact Foundation and you're working with them. And on prior podcasts, I was pretty much fully devoted to the National Christian Foundation here in San Diego. And I still am very, the same role and everything, area director of San Diego, but I'm also wearing a hat now of Impact Foundation and helping serve them. And the reason that came about is in my role at NCF, we would have people that wanted to grant to charity because there are 90,000 charities that you can grant to with your donor advised fund. And many people use it for their church and then all the local groups or internet or whoever they want to grant toward as 501c3s. But then we have the people that want to invest those dollars and invest in a for-profit opportunity. And so we'll unpack that more about how Impact Foundation allows somebody to do that. But I would often have conversations with Impact Foundation with my NCF givers. And it's basically two donor advised funds that work together where you've got your money over here at NCF and you're interested in doing Impact Foundation investing, you can move it over there. So we'll talk about how you and I both contribute to the work of Impact Foundation and are really grateful to be a part of that mission. But let's even just step back further. And why don't you define when we, kind of say the term impact investing? I mean, I know you're mentioning about kind of where those funds were invested, but talk a little bit more about that for the listener who's heard of it, but really doesn't understand what it is about.
Sure. So impact investing is investing for more than just financial return. It's no less than that. You, as an impact investor, you are seeking some kind of financial return. It may be what we call concessionary, and you may only want to get your principal back. Or it could be all the way to you're hoping to, maybe a tech startup to hit big and get a lot of money returned on that investment. But the other ways you analyze that investment is, will it have a social return, a spiritual return, or an environmental return that I care about? And so again, it's that concept of business that will do good. First, screen out, it will do no harm, but then it'll also have a mission that's aligned with your values. And there are secular impact investors, which is wonderful. They are, trying to align their investments with their values. And as Christians, we know that we're supposed to use all of our resources, to submit those to the Lord. And for our investment dollars, they are supposed to make a profit. That's what an investment does. So there's no shame in that. But what we want to do then is make sure that whether it's a company that you're buying stock or equity in, or you're making a loan to, that that company also has some other values and missions. Could be job creation in Africa. It could be empowering women. It could be, there's some wonderful ones trying to suss out human trafficking in supply chains. And they use algorithms. And so there's, and that's a high tech kind of company, but it's doing good in the world. And it's trying to help solve a large global problem.
Right. Very well said. Very well said. So I think the big takeaway for anybody listening to this podcast is, as we go forward with these 4 episodes, we're talking about using your dollars to invest in for-profit activities. And you can use private capital, just your own money to do that. But the unique part about this series is really also going to be focusing on using charitable capital to influence these for-profit opportunities. So one other kind of step back in history, when you as the listener hear of the National Christian Foundation, it was started in 1982, and over $21 billion has been granted out to 501c3 corporations and churches, including churches and all these nonprofits. And so now there are 90,000 groups, right, that you can choose on the platform of who you want to grant out toward. But you're in that example, you're giving the money as charity, and you're here you go. I believe in what you're doing. I believe in you as a leader. I believe in your mission, and here's my money. So this conversation with these 4 episodes is different than that. This is, you've given your money, you've put it in the donor advised fund, you've gotten a charitable deduction, but now we're going to take those dollars, and each of us listening is going to identify, like, what am I passionate about? What is God calling me to invest in the world? And you mentioned, anti-trafficking. Maybe that's just top of your list right now. Maybe it's something more in media entertainment, and this Christian film that you really want to get behind. Maybe it's poverty alleviation. So all kinds of topics. And actually, if you go to impactfoundation.org, you will see the portfolio companies, and you'll just see so many creative ideas that are there of people who've come to us at Impact Foundation and have said, I really want to use this company for good in those 3 areas that Dana mentioned: financial, social, and spiritual. And I have a donor investor who wants to invest in this. And then that individual, he or she, might just want to do it as a loan. They might want to do it as equity. There are a variety of ways. And so the money in that sense, just at a real simplistic level, if that donor investor says, I want to invest $50,000, maybe it's a loan. And over time, maybe it's 5 to 7 years at a certain interest rate, that money comes back to the investor, but it's not his personal money because he started with Charitable Capital. So it means that it's going to go back into his donor advised fund. And maybe if he started with 50 and it does really well, maybe he ends up with 58,000 now, that in a few years is the amount that's paid back into his donor advised fund. But again, the difference is it wasn't given away and it's gone, but now he has 58,000 a number of years later that he can choose. Yeah, I feel like I want to invest in X. And so he's going to just keep multiplying that investment. So we do find a lot of people do a combo of both. They would do granting, and then they would also do the investing side. So it's super exciting with tech today also, and the way that we're all just so uber connected around the world and know what's going on around the world and find out about these opportunities that we want to see if our dollars can have an impact, and we get to be a part of them. I'll do another shout out to someone that both Dana and I know named John Porter here in Orange County. And I met him a number of years ago through Faith Driven. And that's an organization we're in this 4-part series. We're actually going to have Samantha Couch from Faith Driven Investor and Entrepreneur on the podcast as one of our guests as well. But John was connected with that group, and so was I. And I learned through what he did at that time. It just amazed me because he lives here in Orange County with his wife and little one. But he got involved with what's called Masaka Creamery in Rwanda. And over time learned just there were a number of deaf people in that area and they had no community. Like if he didn't provide employment for them at that yogurt factory creamery, they would be out on the street. And instead, they now have like 85%, if not higher, of their workforce is deaf. And they have such a beautiful way of all working together, doing life together at the creamery. And it's just been so exciting then to watch from the other side of things, the investors that want to come alongside John and say, I have money. I've given my money into my donor advised fund and I want to send it to Rwanda. So that's an example of how Impact Foundation also works as that. We use the conduit example of moving the funds from someone here to the organization Masaka Creamery. So it's very, very exhilarating to get to be on calls with people who have the vision of what they're trying to accomplish. And then they bring that donor who has the funds to help that visionary do what they want to accomplish. And then again, we are just helping to move the funds from A to B. So why don't we talk about, Dana, maybe share, you mentioned 3 stories. So why don't we start with Amy Minnick, who is the co-founder of Impact Foundation. And she was actually a prior guest on Generous Girl a number of episodes ago, but she's an attorney and so smart, and just her heart for helping these companies and her brilliance in making it possible. It's just a real joy to get to come alongside her and watch her make such progress in this field. So I'd love to hear more about her story.
Yeah, so we interviewed Amy for one of the stories in our book, and she and Jeff Johns, who started at National Christian Foundation, which, by the way, Bill and I also have our giving fund through National Christian Foundation, and just love NCF and the community and all we've learned through that community. But they realized that there were some folks that felt that they had another bucket of charitable dollars, but they wanted to invest it kind of like the goose that lays the golden egg. Mini endowment is what I call it. You have your giving fund, you grant it out, you donate, you have an impact you want, but you're not going to get any financial return, and people are very familiar with that model, but they're not as familiar with the idea of an endowment where either in a family foundation or any foundation, while you're waiting to grant, you're investing those dollars. And again, why not invest those dollars in something that also promotes your mission while you're also getting some money back? And so because people had that problem of how do we do this legally, Amy and Jeff created the Impact Foundation. And the IRS has granted them this ability to help people have mission or program-related investments. And when we heard about it, years ago, we said, that doesn't sound legal, but we realized, well, Harvard Foundation does it, and all these other foundations invest in in the market to then fund their giving fund. Why can't the regular investor do this, or a regular donor? And so we actually, one of our first investments was in Talenton through Impact Foundation that then invested in Masaka Creamery. So, so we were on that ride of just that joyful ride of learning and seeing what John and everyone was doing at Masaka Creamery from the beginning. And I love the idea of not only raising the dignity, hearing impaired people in, Africa, but also providing nutritious meals. I mean, yogurt and safe food and protein in that part of the world is extremely important. And then also just bringing good business principles to that part of the country, or part of the world, where they're learning show up on time, and you can make a good salary, and you can move up from, within your job to manager. And so there's a lot of redemptive ways that John and his team have operated the business. So it's got a good service that is also treating their employees well, and has won quite a few awards, and is really transforming people's opinion of the disabled in that country. And then Amy is one of my heroes. And whenever I'd hear her speak, I'd come up to her and say, I want to be you when I grow up. And I just love that she and Jeff have unlocked so much of people's generosity, but in a very new tool. Like, we have a new tool in our toolkit to have impact in the world. And the other beauty about impact investing is if you help that company get on its feet and grow and eventually not need money anymore, you have created sustainable impact that no longer needs donor dollars. Those donor dollars can now go to something else that needs church planting or whatever. And so you've now helped tear off a corner of the darkness in the world, created some light in the world, and it now can fund itself because it's a profitable business, right? And so that's the beauty of it. And then you also, a lot of times businesses can scale more frequently than a nonprofit because there's only so many donor dollars. Whereas again, if you're a for-profit company, if there's a demand, that demand can increase across countries. So, and I also like the idea of bringing market discipline to solving problems. We're not saying that nonprofits, if not, when nonprofits have those kind of disciplines, they operate well too. But sometimes when you're not having a market force discipline you can sometimes maybe go off mission or not be quite as efficient.
As accountable.
Or as accountable. So I really like with Impact Foundation, it's really the blending of nonprofit heart and for-profit mentality, heart and mind.
True.
Yeah. And then the other two women that actually, let me go back to Amy, because Impact Foundation now has passed $677 million deployed for good across 152 countries. It's just astounding.
Staggering.
Yes. And we have just so many amazing companies. And let me also add that you can use your donor dollars through Impact Foundation to make a loan to a nonprofit as well. So let's say even a church wanted to add a building, and they went out to the local bank, and the bank wasn't going to give them very favorable terms. But someone in their congregation's like, oh, I have some capital that I need to make some money on, but I will give you a concessional rate. I'll give you 1% lower, or however I decide, a lower interest rate, and I will give it to you for longer than the bank would have. I'll give you favorable terms because I believe in what you're doing. And you can do that through Impact Foundation. So you can bless nonprofits that way as well.
But the person wants to be paid back rather than just a gift.
Yes. And paid back, again, we don't want to brand that as unethical. They want to be paid back because assuming they are a steward, that means God has other ideas for that paid back capital. He may have, that may go towards a church plant overseas, or it may, it may go, particularly when it's in the charitable world, it's already going to go towards some good in the world. But we can continue. It's like a flywheel of continual impact.
Yes. And that idea of, quote, paying back, or those funds going back into the donor advised fund, people tend to have two different opinions. Some people feel like that's charitable capital. I have such a responsibility to steward it. I can't lose a dime. And they're not willing to take a lot of risk with it. And then other people look at it with, it's charitable capital. I've already given it. It's not my money. Again, it was never ours in the first place. We're stewards, but they feel like, hey, I'm going to give this guy a chance who's running this coffee shop in Uganda, and he wouldn't have a chance without my charitable capital. So there are two sides of that coin too, to look at it and to just see honestly how God wants you to use your money. And then you take that step with how he wants you to invest it or grant it, or what he's laid on your heart. Okay, you mentioned two other gals. Who else did you want to spotlight?
So we have Rachel McDonough, who's a financial advisor. You're probably well aware of her.
She's going to be a part of this show. Okay. She's a part of our 4-part series. Super. So this is even a better, like a little preamble to what's coming.
And the delightful thing about Rachel and other Kingdom advisors is that their heart is, again, to help people be stewards and not owners of their money. So again, manage it well. Their fiduciary responsibility is to help their client manage their resources, for whatever goals they have. And, if God, I can believe that God would have us want to make money with our investments, right? So that we can provide for ourselves and our needs, and also to have a surplus so that we can be generous. And so a Kingdom advisor will say, what are your giving goals? Think through what your giving goals are. And again, that's against, like in a worldly sense, that means there's less money for her to manage.
Right.
So it's a disincentive for most
for the
advisors to encourage you to give away more money. But Kingdom advisors say, no, we want to, we're accountable to the Lord. So we want to help you manage your money so you can also give well and give effectively. And then what are some areas you might want to invest some of that capital in faith-driven companies? And there are plenty of now faith-driven companies that you can make market rate return. And so it's called doing well while doing good, And so that whole market is exploding now. And people are starting to become aware that their just regular investments might be undoing, or having all kinds of harm and evil in the world that they weren't aware of. And
Mm-hmm.
a Christian financial advisor can help you go through your portfolio and understand that and help you steer you towards good investing, moral investing. I'd say beyond just ethical, but redemptive investing, which our friends at Praxis talk about,
Yes.
And then feeling like we're integrated in whole people, that every part of our lives are bringing glory to God and aligned with his purposes in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So that's Rachel. Yeah.
Okay.
And then
who's the third?
Yeah. Third is Kurt and Katrina Laird, who live in Africa. And I met them through the Christian Economic Forum. And they are just a lovely couple, really committed now to helping Kenya. So they're kind of trying to look at a countrywide impact strategy. And as a husband wife, they operate like Bill and I in terms of, just so together with their mission. And Katrina is the side that understands the nonprofit needs. She used to work for the United Nations, and she understands how to think through using catalyzing, donations to then lift up the other side, which Kurt runs, which is an impact fund into for-profit companies in Africa that are doing good. And I also like that blend because I do believe there's some really hard, broken markets or areas that need to happen that the private sector could address, but there's regulations that keep them from doing it. And they would need nonprofit, maybe catalyzing capital to lift them off the ground, to prove that that concept works, and to eventually make it profitable so that the private sector will start funding those interventions. And they're all about women's empowerment and dignified jobs and bringing health to people. And so I just love the way the two of them work together. I love seeing couples aligned in understanding finance, but understanding impact requires different kinds of capital at different times.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. No, those are three great stories to spotlight, and just to kind of zoom out on this 4-part series and why we're doing what we're doing is we're trying to, through this series, help the person who doesn't know anything about impact investing, and we're trying to help the person who might be a savvy investor who can hear these 4 interviews and listen to, okay, what's my next step? What do I want to do? And maybe if you look at a continuum, you're at the far left side where you know nothing. And that is wonderful that you're here and you're listening. And some of these terms might be very new to you, but I guarantee you it's a language that can be learned. And once you learn it, you're going to realize there's power in this language, and there's power as females because of this whole concept that we referred to on the podcast numerous times called the Great Wealth Transfer. So all kinds of different numbers are out there, but I've heard $80 trillion in the next 10 years, and it's probably even higher now since the last time I heard that, but is going to be transferred to women. And that might be through the death of parents and boomers, but for whatever reason, God is moving this wealth to women. And we know that women frequently outlive their male spouse. But why has God raised up this time to have all of these resources going to women? We all know the book of Esther, for such a time as this. And what does he want us to do as women to steward this wealth and to steward it well, to give it away, to invest it, to use it and enjoy it with all the things that he's given us. So we're just trying to, at a high level, give a little taste of this whole world of impact investing. And maybe you're looking at your bank account and you don't feel like you've got a lot extra right now. That's okay. Maybe he just wants you to start with something small. Maybe you're at the other end of that spectrum and you're recently widowed and you found that you had more resources. You have more resources now than you ever knew you had. But either way, all of us are responsible and accountable in a really great way to get to learn more about this field and to hear these incredible stories and to be inspired to just see what he wants us to do with the capital that he's entrusted us with. But really, as iron sharpens iron, I mean, that is the purpose of this podcast, is hear these incredible stories, And then you hear Dana Wichterman and her husband, Bill, and how they've written this book and how they've been involved as investors. And then you take that away to go, wow, my husband and I, we weren't aware of this. And I want to tell my husband, and we've been granting our money and giving it away, but gosh, maybe we should take some of this and do some impact investing. So as we do this podcast, Generous Girl, we're always trying to educate, empower, and equip each listener and each of us as guests and hosts on the show. As we all learn more, we all learn to take the next step that is before us. And the other thing I always try to do on the show is we always have incredible stories, incredible women guests and all that they're doing where they're thriving. But then there is always a time, or there's currently a time, where they're working on overcoming some form of adversity. So to bring it back to that, Dana, for you, I know you've had health issues. So did you want to talk any more about how you've been able to do all that you've done in this field of impact investing, along with some really serious health struggles that you've had to deal with?
Sure. And I usually don't bring this up because I don't want to that's not usually the topic I want to talk to people about, because we all carry some kind of burden, some kind of cross, and some kind of sorrow in our life. But the Lord has always given me a sense of my calling and motivated me. I've always felt that I'm here to, do his will, and to really, since I was 19, felt called to help address global poverty, And so I was, just an A-type person, ready to do the challenge, thought I would be living overseas most of my life, doing exciting things. And when my husband and I got married, I developed a illness called fibromyalgia. That was 35 years ago. People thought it was in your head at the time, because there's no clinical way to really, prove that you have it. It's kind of a bucket disease, which means pain in your muscles and weakness and chronic fatigue. There's no cure. And really what it is, I think now they're understanding that it's a dysfunctional central nervous system where you have overreactions to everything. And so you experience pain because your muscles are firing at inappropriate times. So I've had this for 35 years, learned to live with it. And the hardest part of it is not only just the daily pain and managing how much I can enter into regular life, but I call it a dream crusher, because I had all these dreams. That was me and God, we're going to go solve global poverty.
Yes,
and kids have this view that they're probably an inflated view of what they think they can do in the world. But what the Lord has taught me is, I do have good works for you to do in this world. I do want you to co-labor with me, and I will equip you to the extent I want you to participate. And so you will be equipped and provided the opportunity to do those good works. Your illness will not keep you from doing what I had planned for you when I designed you in the womb. And so when I think of it that way, then I realize, okay, so he's only given me so much energy. Then that's the energy I'm supposed to apply.
That's what I work with.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So again, it's, I think, a stewardship of another resource, which everyone says, oh, we all have 24 hours. And I say, yeah, but you don't spend, how many hours in bed every day, or, because you're trying to just recover from your pain.
Right.
And yet I'm not dead. I had a chronic illness, not an acute illness. I've lived a full life. I have a wonderful marriage and 3 wonderful kids. I needed an awful lot of help with raising kids because of my fibromyalgia. We did have to have live-in nannies, and I felt often like I was the grandmother in the room, kind of directing things, and the nanny.
You couldn't physically do it.
Yeah, because I physically had trouble even holding children in my arms for too long. So there was a lot of sorrow and sadness of what I didn't get to do because of my illness. But I also thought, look at what you do have. And that's what he's taught me, is be grateful what you do have, and under his sovereign goodwill. There's a reason for why I've gone through what I've gone through. So,
well, I appreciate your honesty, your vulnerability, and your transparency in sharing that. And Who knows? Maybe if you were living overseas, you never would have written your book, and maybe your book's going to have a far wider reach than your one life living overseas would have had. Like all the things, right? That we don't know. But I do think for all of us, like you said, it is that acceptance, the surrender of what we thought it might look like and how it does look like. And then we still have those desires in our heart. We still have the works that he set out for us. But I think probably for every listener, it looks different than we thought it would when we were 18.
Exactly.
And it's happening and it's great, but none of us could have scripted it. Yeah. And so, well, thank you for sharing that, because sometimes I think when people, I've heard, way too many other stories or podcasts or shows. And I think when that element is not a part of it, then all of us listening go, well, I don't know how to apply that. It's because my life involves this hardship or my, this struggle. And so I always want to let the listener know that in this fallen world, we all have things. And so how can each of us just not be paralyzed to do nothing, but we want to take that next step? And so hearing your story, knowing what you and Bill have done and what you've built and what you're continuing to build is just such a beautiful life story, and it is a beautiful legacy. So I appreciate just all of your generosity with sharing your wisdom, and then your generosity as an investor and investing in these companies. And did you want to say anything about like how, because a person does need to keep in mind with impact investing, there's certainly risks. So sometimes it can go great, and then other times maybe the money's not going to be returned if you use charitable dollars, and it's not going to come back to the fund. Maybe speak about how that might look on both sides of that coin.
Yeah, well, okay, so I would say I have over 30 investments that I would say are impact first investments. Meaning that I care more about the impact than I care about the financial return, although I do want the financial return that they have built in their business model, because it's good for them as well as good for the investor. And I would say at this point, many of them have not come to fruition because sometimes they take 7 to 10 years to maybe get an equity payback or something that company has to sell or merge. But many of the ones that I've invested in for debt have actually returned. I've got 2 that have returned exactly what they said they return. Nice. And I could have redeemed the money, and I decided to roll it back in for another 3 years because I'm so pleased with both of these funds and what they're doing, both in Africa and in Asia.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And then I have 1 or 2 that have done really well and are probably going to fund, when I cash out, will fund greater generosity in the future because their payback is so good and their impact is still something I'm very satisfied with. However, I have had losses, and 1 or 2 of those companies, because again, they were high risk companies, high risk, high reward. And one of them was sold to a venture capital firm, secular, that felt like they could just spend money, too randomly, and the company went under. And the sad part about that was I had partnered with a faith-driven entrepreneur in that one who would have had a high stake in making some money off the sale of that company, that he was then going to invest in amazing church planting in Central America. And at the same time, the company itself was providing dignified jobs to people in Central America, and it was producing a very good product as well. It was a ocean fishery tanks that were doing it in such a way that it was eco-friendly, environmentally friendly, and also produced really healthy protein, high quality for the world. So had all the marks of a good, it had an environmental marker, it had a social and economic empowerment for local people. It was going to produce protein for the world. And spiritual impact, because they were also impacting some of the local churches. And yet it went under. And I have to admit, my first heart response was bummer to me. Like I lost my,
right.
And then right away, and someone else reminded me, let's pray for the entrepreneur who had so much more of a stake in what that company should have done. And again, when you're partnering with these people, I know them well. I know their heart. I know what he had plans for that money that was going to be used for such good. And so
Mm-hmm.
right away, I was able to call and pray with him. And so you do
Nice.
partner in such a beautiful way with these builders. I look at it as I'm a backer and they're the builder. And God has given them the grit, the opportunity,
Yep.
and the abilities
Faith,
and the faith
risk.
to do the building of that business. And I'm not an
Yes.
entrepreneur. I'm not made that way, but I'd love to come alongside and encourage and help capitalize their efforts.
Wonderful. That's a great way to wrap this up. And I think it's been a wonderful conversation, Dana. And I think it's been a perfect first interview of this 4-part series. So thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for being here on this podcast. And I just want to wrap up with your favorite Bible verse, book you're currently reading, and a recent bargain as we close our show out today.
Yeah. So I have to admit, I don't have one favorite Bible verse, but what the favorite Bible verse for the context of impact investing is Ephesians 2:10, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, but we are God's handiwork, created to do good works, prepared in advance for us to do. And what I think of is that those particular acts of mercy and grace and impact that the Lord foresaw that he wanted us to do, we were designed for that. So if we step into those, we will feel more whole and more of ourself and find more meaning and satisfaction and peace and joy in the world, because God's a good God. He designs his people perfectly for and equipping them for what he wants them to do, both now and in heaven. So that's my favorite verse that I apply to impact investing, and just delight in with him that he's allowed me to come alongside and partner with, as you say, so many creative, hardworking, kingdom-minded people that are bringing solutions that I would have never seen. Like, it just blows my mind.
I know, me too.
What some of them are doing. And I just get giddy to be a part of a little part of what they're doing.
I know, exactly.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So that's my favorite verse applied to impact investing.
Yes.
And then my book that I'm reading several, but right now the one that I think also applies to my journey with impact investing is by Andy Crouch, and it's called Playing God. So he has a lot of great books, but this one's on power. And when Christians think of the word power, right away we think, oh, too much power, it's evil. We're supposed to be humble. That means we're supposed to not have power. What he says is power is just one more resource. Think of it as influence. And if we have power through our platform, say, for example, through podcasts, we're supposed to use that power for good and submit it for his glory, the good of others, and for our sanctification and for our joy. And so when you reframe power that way as influence, then you, again, would use all your resources. He's the king, and we are just his ambassadors in a dominion. And he's given us, we are viceroys, and he's given us dominion. And so we are supposed to have power and authority to use to, fight back evil and promote good.
That's great. I'm adding that. We always put together the list of the guests all year, the books. At the end of the year, we'll show on social media kind of all the different books people have recommended. And I still have such a long list to read because they're wonderful, but I'm adding that one for sure to my list. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Well, and actually the reason it relates to my journey of writing the book was I didn't want to write about our story in the book. I felt like that might be boasting, and no, let's highlight all these other people. But the thing was, I was asking other people to share their story. And then people said, well, you write a book on these things and you're advocating for them. And if you don't share any of your story, then you don't have as much credibility. So I kind of reluctantly started writing more of our story in the book. And then also, as you know, books are now marketed through social media. That also was hard for me, not hard for my husband. He's fine with that kind of platform, but I had a harder time. And the Lord said, get over yourself. And this is my message. And you're just the conduit. And so
let's get that word out there.
Yeah. Once I look at it that way, it's like, I'm just trying to get the word out that generosity is a joyful and amazing journey, and it's worth promoting and highlighting. Don't hide it under a bushel. If you find people in this community that are doing it well, right?
Right.
We have plenty of stories of people not doing it well, but why not highlight those that are doing it well by God's grace?
Exactly. So they can purchase your book, as we said, on Amazon.
Yes. Stewards Not Owners.
Stewards Not Owners.
And you can also go to stewardsnotowners.com, and you can find stories and all kinds of resources and other ways to get involved in impact investing, but also in the generosity movement in general.
Wonderful. All right. And your bargain.
Oh, anything at a thrift store or Free Cycle. Okay. In fact, I had to go off Free Cycle because I would spend too much time on it thinking, oh, do I want that? And am I going to go get that? And I just said, no, I've got to stop. So I'm fasting from that. And also now when I do go to the thrift store, I have to take back items because I'm committed to not bringing any more items in unless there's something that goes out. But I do I get an unusual amount of joy if I find a bargain.
A treasure. I love people like you, and many of my guests are just like you. And then I have many guests who aren't bargain shoppers, which has been surprising to me. But so we have both on the show. But I'm with you. I love getting a bargain as well. So thank you, Dana. God bless you, and you and Bill. And I'm looking forward to following your journey as you go on additional shows, promoting your book, and kind of seeing the new movement that might come of this concept of stewards, not owners, in the impact investing space. And all of us, here we are in 2025. We're halfway through the year as it is. And God, what do you want us to do with these resources you've given us? And not only does it help us be obedient, but we know through that obedience we're so looking forward to that joy that you will give us by taking that step. And it's just so worth it because it makes life so much more fun and such a journey that it's just really, we're grateful to be on. So thanks again. God bless.
Thank you, Kim.
And yes, we'll look forward to episode 2 coming up in 2 weeks. So thanks again. Bye-bye. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Generous Girl podcast. We're so glad that you're here. And if you know of someone that you think needs to be a guest on this podcast, please reach out to us. New episodes are released every other week, and you can follow us on YouTube and on all platforms. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.